In the last lesson, we examined the progressive tenses. In this lesson, we'll examine the perfect tenses. Now, in general, we use perfect tenses to show order of events or a more complex time sequence. Given their complexity, perfect tenses are the most difficult to understand, and as such, they are frequently tested. Let's begin with present perfect tense. We use this tense to describe an action that occurred at an indefinite time in the past and may continue into the present and possibly into the future. To create this tense, we combine has or have with a past participle. Consider this sentence: Sue has climbed Mount Everest. In this sentence, it is unclear when Sue climbed Mount Everest, and it's unclear how many times she climbed it. She may have climbed it once, twice, or dozens of times. We don't know. All we know is that this event happened at least once. More importantly, there is no reason to believe that the action will not continue into the future. Compare that sentence with this one. Here, we're using the simple past tense, so this sentence is telling us about one specific event that was completed in the past. Alright, let's examine another sentence that uses the present perfect tense. Vince has washed his hands. Notice once again that we're describing a non-specific action here. All we know is that Vince performed this action at least once, and he may or may not continue to perform this action in the future. Alright, here are some more examples of sentences with present perfect tense. Now you may be wondering why we call this the present perfect tense when it's used to discuss non-specific actions that seem to have occurred in the past. Well, there are two reasons for this. First, the present perfect tense does not exclude the possibility that the event will continue into the present and into the future. In fact, when we use the present perfect tense, it's even possible that the action is occurring at this very moment. For example, in the sentence, Ted has visited France, we are not referring to one specific action that occurred in the past. In fact, Ted may have visited France several times, and more importantly, he may be visiting France at this very moment. Compare that sentence with this one. Ted visited France. Here we are referring to one specific event that was completed in the past. Now, the second reason we call this the present perfect tense is that it can be used to describe actions that began in the past and continue into the present. For example, in the sentence, Jill has worked at Pizza World for 8 years, we can see that Jill has worked at Pizza World in the past and that this action continues into the present. Conversely, if we were to use the simple past tense here, as in Jill worked at Pizza World for 8 years, we know that the action was completed in the past. In other words, we know that Jill no longer works at Pizza World. Okay, here are some more examples of sentences that use the present perfect tense to express past actions that continue into the present. Now, it's important to point out that in many instances, it can be very difficult to determine whether it's appropriate to use the present perfect tense or the simple past tense. For example, which of these two sentences is correct? Well, it's hard to tell. If the free soda thing were a one-time occurrence that was completed in the past, then this sentence would be appropriate. Otherwise, this sentence would be appropriate. Fortunately, on test day, we won't have to determine which of these sentences is correct without some kind of context to help guide us. For example, if we were told that an action occurred in 1973, then we'd use the simple past tense, as in 1973, Frank's Diner provided a free soda with every burger. Conversely, if we were told that an action has occurred ever since 1973, then we'd use the present perfect tense, as in, since 1973, Frank's Diner has provided a free soda with every burger. Okay, so that's how the present perfect tense works. Now let's examine the past perfect tense. We use this tense to describe a completed action that occurred in the past before some other completed action also occurred in the past. To create this tense, we combine the word had with the past participle of a verb. Consider this example. Karen quickly adjusted to life in Paris because she had studied French. Here we have two completed actions that occurred in the past. Karen adjusted and she studied. If we showed these actions on a timeline, we know that Karen adjusted in the past. Now, where on the timeline do we place the studying? Well, since we used the past perfect tense had studied in the sense, we know that the studying happened before the adjusting. In general, if a specific completed action occurred in the past, then we use the simple past tense for that action. If some other completed action occurred before that other action, then we use the past perfect tense for that action. All right, let's look at some more examples beginning with this one. After June had learned to drive, she felt more independent. Here we have two completed actions that occurred in the past. June learned and June felt. Since had learned is in past perfect tense form, we know that this action occurred before the other action. So if we examine the sequence of events on a timeline, we can see that the learning must have happened before the feeling. All right, one more example. We fed the elephant oats because it had eaten all of the hay. Here we can tell that the eating must have occurred before the feeding. So if you see a sentence with an action expressed in past perfect tense form, then you must confirm that the action was indeed completed in the past, and you must confirm that the action was completed before another action was completed in the past. Now, I should mention a few important considerations regarding the past perfect tense. To begin, there are occasions in which we can use the past perfect tense without including another past action. Consider this example. Prior to 1995, Harry had visited Peru several times. Here we have two actions that occurred in the past. The only difference here is that one of those actions is implied. The year 1995 isn't really an action, but it is something that occurred in the past. Since the visiting occurred before 1995, we use the past perfect tense had visited to indicate this. Now, another consideration regarding the past perfect tense is that it is not always necessary to use this tense whenever two actions are completed in the past. Consider this example. Gary baked a cake and served it to his family. Here we have two actions that occurred in the past, and we can tell from the context that the baking occurred before the serving. So it would seem that we could use the past perfect tense here and write, Gary had baked a cake and served it to his family. Now, it is not grammatically incorrect to write, Gary had baked a cake and served it to his family. But it isn't really necessary to do so, since we can tell from the context that the baking must have occurred before the serving. So if the order of the actions is 100% obvious, we need not use the past perfect tense, although it's still okay to do so. Now, unfortunately, there is no perfect rule for determining whether or not the order of certain actions is 100% obvious, so it is highly unlikely that you would ever need to determine this. In fact, even when the order is obvious, you will not be asked to choose which tense is appropriate. For example, the GMAT would never ask you to identify which of these sentences is better. What you do need to know is that if an action is expressed in past perfect tense form, then that action must have been completed before some other action was completed in the past. Okay, the last consideration regarding past perfect tense is that the other past event involved must have been completed in the past. Consider this example. Fred had painted the fence first, but Amy has painted it ever since. In this sentence, we have two actions occurring in the past. However, even though Fred's painting occurred before Amy's painting, this sentence is not correct, since Amy's painting was never completed in the past. In fact, the present perfect tense form of has painted tells us that the painting may extend into the present and into the future. Since Amy's painting is not a completed action, we cannot use the present perfect tense had painted. Now, since Fred's painting was completed in the past, we can express this action in simple past tense form to get Fred painted the fence first, but Amy has painted it ever since. Okay, that's all I want to say about past perfect tense. The last perfect tense to discuss is the future perfect tense. We use this tense to describe a future action that will be completed before another future action occurs. To create this tense, we combine will have with a past participle. Consider the sentence. Warren will have arrived at work before his boss gets out of bed. Here there are two future actions, arriving and getting out of bed. Since the arriving will have occurred before the getting out of bed, we express the arriving in future perfect tense. Okay, here's another example. By the time Dirk graduates from high school, his parents will have saved thousands of dollars for his post-secondary education. Here we have two future actions. Since the saving will have occurred before the graduating, we express the saving in future perfect tense. Alright, one last example. On May 29th, Bart will have served as mayor for 3 years. In this sense, one of the future actions is implied. The future date of May 29th counts as one action, and the action that occurs before that is the serving. As such, we express the serving in future perfect tense. Okay, so that's the deal with perfect tenses. Let's summarize. In this lesson, we took a closer look at all of the perfect tenses.